All right. All right. So you would have just watched my, I don't know what I'm calling it right now. The project is called the Demon Redesign. Found this, first of all, the VFX for it was amazing. Like I saw that and as I was trying to find stuff to put sound to and do sound redesigns of, that one was just crazy. Like the effects, it was in 4K. Everything about it was just awesome. It had the different scenes and just cinematic. 10 out of 10, the VFX artist absolutely killed it. So their credit where it is due. But there was no sound with it, and I could hear it all in my head, especially with like the storm coming in and all the knives and the fire and everything. Like it was begging for sound. So I'm going to break down this project here, which it has a lot of tracks, but a lot of them is just stuff I hadn't used. I could probably clean up the session a little bit, but I just finished this like 20 minutes ago. So I wanted to make this video as fresh in my head. Anyways, yeah, so first of all, it had the unsheath sound. Oh, I can pull up the video. Apologies. Yeah, I'll pull up the video so you can watch it as I do this. All right. There we go. Just so you can see a little bit. Yeah, so I wanted like a fairly powerful sheathing. Like it's not supposed to, again, I try not to make it so like literal, which you'll see a lot with like the knife sounds that fly around later. But the sheath, so I had also, which isn't in this group, but it's like just a little lead up to it, which again, when it's non-linear like this, like I mostly focus on game audio, but obviously when I'm doing something linear, I mean, I can take a lot more liberties with making swells in and other stuff that you wouldn't necessarily get with purely game audio. So I treated this more as like a cinematic thing. Anyways, so I have this riser. Just to add something at the start of the video too. And then it's a lot of layering, so I'll play it soloed. So there's two main things that I wanted to get out of that, or I'll play one more time. So the two main things are obviously the actual unsheathing itself, which I believe is all this. Obviously like a very exaggerated unsheathing, but I wanted to establish right away, like there's going to be some serious stuff that you're going to watch. And then I have the little glisten that you see on the sword. That actually took me a surprising amount of time to do because I kept on wanting it to be more tonal and wanting it to have like almost like a ding to it or something, but it either felt too cheesy or like stood out too much. It was a very surprisingly hard time. So I kind of landed in this place that is like a mixture of tonal and atonal, and really that was just processing. I don't know if I processed it in a different session than this. Kind of just making it worse and pitch shifting stuff a little bit. And then just some wild EQ, just mostly just mixing stuff. But yeah, my goal was to get this mixture of tonal and atonal so that there would be a pitch to it, but it wouldn't necessarily be like a melodic element. But it was definitely something I wanted to hit with the sheath, and I'm pretty happy with the result. Because I wanted this to be serious, and a lot of the other projects, like the two redesigns that I have up on my YouTube before this, I don't know if I should talk about videos specifically because I might remove and re-upload and redo things, but anyways, they were very tonal, like they were very cyber and like futuristic and stuff, and I like to go more tonal with that type of stuff. So with this one, I didn't want to go the magic route of like necessarily AAA type stuff where a lot of it still is really tonal, like in Diablo and stuff like that. It's a lot of that like low mid sort of rumbliness and everything, and I have a bit of that at the end and at certain parts, but in general the actual sound of it that I was going for was this atonal, a bit more noisy, something more like Elden Ring, but not Elden Ring is very like mono. It's almost like retro in a way with a lot of their sound effects. So I didn't want to necessarily go for that. But just so you know my thought process and my goal with all of this. So that was why I wanted to keep that atonal. And then with just all the sounds in general, I tried to keep them like that and balance it in all this noise and everything in a very cohesive way. So you have the sheath there, and then you have the fire ring sort of like expanding / cast. Nothing fancy there on processing, just I had done I had done another session to create a bunch of source for this, so it's really sorry, I had a dog hair in my mouth. I did another session to have a bunch of source created for this, so that's where a lot of this is coming from. So even though there is no plugins on it, there was quite a chain to get a lot of these things, but a lot of it wasn't too complicated. It was just like some filtering, decrackling, denoising, just to clean up all this stuff, because I knew there would be so much layering, and I also knew that I would have quite a lot of atonal stuff in here, that when you have all that, you want to clear out as much space as you can. So anything that's not really important and anything that you can get out of the way is really good to do so, because then it combines and it sounds a lot cleaner. Like, that could have been a lot more crunchier in the top end and everything, but I knew that it was also going to be layered with this, which is the kind of like ring of fire. Ring of fire, go down, down. Sorry. And in general, it's pretty basic fire. I didn't even process them that much, or am I lying? Oh, I did a little bit of, I finished this like 20 minutes ago, but I did this part yesterday. A little bit of all pass phase here. I don't even know if you could hear that if I removed it, but yeah, the main thing is just a little bit of convolution reverb on this stuff, EQ to sort of balance different versions of the fire tracks to get them all in tune with each other, or balanced with each other. And then this plugin that I actually have to buy in the next 24 hours because it's on demo, and the sale ends on Plugin Alliance. This plugin is awesome. It's really good for like controlling low end and just sort of especially scooping out like that mid-range, like the clarity knob here. What is it? Around 400. Yeah, it just opens it up so much, especially if you have other stuff, which I'll talk about later when I do all like the fire missiles. I really relied on the space that this plugin carved out to do that. And it makes a big difference if I turn it off and on. So with it, so you can hear it really cuts out a lot of the mid-range, which sometimes it can be a lot of detail in there that you're missing. So you need to be a bit careful with when you use this, but I really like the effect that gave that. And it also, because I have this big section later on, I wanted to keep this fire still powerful. So I kept, which is like, but not as big necessarily. So I kept a lot of like the low end and I kept a lot of the top end from it, and sort of carved out that middle with basement and with just the general design choice of the sounds and how I EQ'd them, so that it wouldn't necessarily feel as full. And then what do I have? I had one other thing on this part which added a lot, which you might not have really noticed, but it's this. It's like a little, it's part of the strings that come in during the big part. I just chopped up a piece of it and put it at that part. And I also put it at the start. Very subtly, you might not even hear that. But yeah, so I'll play that. I'll play the Ring of Fire with this and without it, and now you'll really notice it. So do with it first, and then I'll do without it. See, it makes a big difference, and it kind of makes it into like a spell instead of just a recording of fire, you know? And that's where I was talking about like needing or wanting to keep a lot of things very atonal, but there is some sort of tonality that you need to have, especially differentiating between just the natural sounds and making it something magical. Like you need it to have that sort of a magical feeling. You need some of that tonality, you need some of that weirdness, you need it to be kind of like emanating from something, or like that magical energy. And I feel like that in my head is always tonality. It has a pitch, it has a musical cue almost, or something. When you think of a spell in a game, depending, like the more stylized and like cartoony you get, the more tonal things will be and the more melodic they'll be. And then obviously, yeah, you get into something, even in something like Elden Ring or games with very like serious sound effects and whatever. It's a lot of, there is always still that little element, whether it's a ding or whatever. And that can be used also to help tie in like groups of enemies, or in something like League of Legends, right? Where they have like 20 different skins for one character, but it's the same sword ability, right? Like can you really differentiate that with 20 different completely tonal abilities, like just a sword swinging? Not really. They flourish it with that sort of tonality and these pitched hits. So didn't mean to start ranting there about stuff, but was my thinking with all of this. And I really wanted to practice doing that, because a lot of what I've done so far for my reel is a lot of just straight up tonal stuff. I haven't actually shown that I can combine the more noisy, serious sound effects with that, and why I would want to do that, and that I can do that. So that was the Ring of Fire. Then while that Ring of Fire is happening, this sound was partially something that I thought was going to be harder to do, but maybe I just lucked out. But yeah, either way, where all the knives are spinning. So I'll play it for you so you can remember. Now see, I feel like with these types of sounds, you always want to go very literal right away, right? Like you want to, like there's a lot of knives, right? I could just have like like, or slashes or whatever. But it won't make sense. Like those are happening too quick. It would just end up being this jumble of noise. So you need to think about like, what can I do that will make that feel like a bunch of knives, right? So what I did was, in another session, I believe these two are from a different session. And it's basically just noise to a degree. Like, you know, you're going to get that noise anyways if you try to combine that many knives. And in order to communicate that fact that there is a lot of knives and that's part of the ability, I designed it intentionally instead of just letting that happen due to having a lot of knives on the screen. So it was a little bit of granular processing with this plugin I have called Triad. I wish I should have maybe I'll pull up the other session at the end of this. But basically I just wanted noise that's based off of like sheathing and knives and blades, so that when I did this, and then you combine it with a couple other layers like this. That's just like a general purpose riser. And then this was something I did in this session. Again, I knew like if you're going to end up with noise anyways, you may as well design that noise. And so with this, again, like you're going to have a lot of these things. So I wanted to be intentional. Like I knew I needed a lot of like transients. I knew I needed a lot of information like that, but I also knew that they would all blend together. So I created this out of a bunch of things that I bounced down, use all pass a couple times, and then did this. And then with Spec Ops is really good for working with atonal source and with mushing things together into noise that sounds pleasing, right? So it has a lot to do with this smear. right? And so the source is actually somewhat tonal considering how quick they are and how many there are. But that doesn't work here, right? Because that would have sounded way too kind of futuristic or electronic, which I definitely did not want in this project. So Spec Ops is perfect for grabbing source like that, and then with pitch shifting, the speed at which I'm not going to talk about Spec Ops. This plugin's awesome. I'd love to make a different video on it. But essentially, you can smear it, you can smush it, and you can stretch it into this really nice noise. And then when you combine all those layers together, they sound a bit weird on their own, but in context of everything, especially with all the fire happening and everything, it works, right? All right. Sorry, I'm using a GoPro as a webcam. It's not really that great. I'm not sure how much of this I'll cut out, but I assume that I'll keep the little knife discussion here, and I was just talking about this. And basically, this was just, I wanted this to service the big sky explosion. And you could have done some really, really interesting or cool stuff with the fly up and made it sound like a firework or a flare or something like that. And I did experiment with it, but I just felt that in the end, it sounded a lot better if I used that gap as a way to make the next section punch. So I'll solo this quickly just so you can hear what it is. It's mostly just risers and like a little bit of a knife thing to accentuate all the spinning ones and kind of remind you that that's what that is. You get that little bubbly futuristic thing, but I could probably remove that. You can't really hear it in context. But yeah, not much to say about that. It was mostly just, yeah, to service this section, which, gosh, hardly fits on my screen. I should probably clean up these sessions before I do these videos, but I'm new to Reaper, and I just really wanted to make this while it was fresh in my head, and I had some time today. So, two kind of main, or I'll go three, right? Because maybe four. There's a lot to talk about here. One moment. So, first, major layers are, I wanted the sky sound, which I believe is all of these. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, I wanted to keep that pretty dark, and I kept a lot of the top end out of that to make sure, because I knew there was going to be a ton of stuff happening at this section. So just really wanted that to fill out all of the low end. Yeah, and of course, the storm opens up, and again, credits to the VFX artists. Like, all the timing on these are just like so incredibly well done. Like the fact that, yeah, the sky opens up and then all of the crazy stuff starts happening. So you get a chance to see that and hear that, and then all the stuff starts going on. Like, master of their craft. So not really much to talk about with the storm. It's I didn't record all these field recordings. Obviously, these are from libraries that I've processed and whatnot, but I curated it, right? Just a lot of stuff with like this one here sounds kind of weird, but it sounds weird without it. It's a bit subtle. Sounded weird when I was doing some other design before, but either way, nothing complicated here. I will move on from it to actually a part before it, which I used to play timpanis in high school band. So those big drums that you would tune and you do the rolls and stuff. I love those things. They are awesome. There's big tuned tonal drums. You got a lot of power with them, and I would love doing that. So anyways, I love to use timpani rolls and stuff because they sound awesome. And I know it's only a little bit, but it's like that little flam that adds into this like horror hit. Just punch, you know. So without that, it is a lot less punchy. And it's just an epic sound. So put that in there. I don't even think I processed these much, if at all. And no, definitely not in this session. So yeah. Again, it's weather. It sounds like weather. The whole thing I had, I'll talk about this in a little bit more after, but I have a basement going in here and I actually automated it. Talk about that more when I talk about the missiles, the like fire raining, because that was kind of the main reason why I did that. So the music or the chords originally, do I have it here and is it easily accessible? One sec. Because I tried something else at one point. You can see why I didn't use that. It was like I was flipping through some samples to find like some strings or whatever that I could manipulate, and I got that trap sound, and I was like, it's kind of hard. So I put that in, and I was like, almost. Maybe if it was something a bit more futuristic and a good context, I could have done something like that. But it wasn't working for this. I'm doing something next where I'm doing a lot of like graffiti and like rap sounds, and it's got like all these cool like almost True Damage from League type of VFX on it. So my head is kind of on that. So that's I think why I went there. But anyways, yeah, I wanted basically just epic sounding strings, and you know I could do it myself, but I had this perfect loop. Well, it's not even a loop. Is like, oops, I'm gonna get that back into there. Just perfect, you know? And it was able to be essentially looped by just blending them into each other. Because, you know, they're just trilling or whatever, there's reverb and whatnot, so they blended really well together. So it's literally just that the whole time. Again, quite a full sound, and then combined with the sky stuff, there was a lot of like low end and mid-range sort of mud, and instinctually I would want to remove that and clean it up and blah blah blah, but the thing is that that's where a lot of like power comes from. Like you could have really cleaned that up and then gone really bass heavy with the missiles or whatever, but it felt wrong to do that. I did do some attempts to do that with like even like track spacer, and I had like different, I just didn't like it, especially because with the missiles, fitting them into all of this was already one thing, and then fitting them into all of it and then also removing the bass from all this stuff, it just wasn't working. Like it felt good to have the power from the thunder and from this, and even though it's going to be dissonant down there and basically just noise, it's power, right? And it gave me the like emotional response to this moment that I wanted, so I kept it. Because maybe you're breaking the rules, but if you break the rules and it sounds good and feels good, then you know, that's what you do. Towards the end of this, like the sky contracts, which I guess I'll talk about in a sec, but there's just some additional music that comes in, which is kind of a bit covered up by some other things, but definitely adds to it. Actually, there's one other track that really contributes to that too, but it's in the other things. Yeah, just a little yell, which actually was originally, again, sometimes I was just flipping through samples and I heard something and I'm like, there's gotta be a way I can use that. Just like general war and battle. Because I thought I didn't really necessarily like represent this or do this, but I thought like it fit well because it kind of sounds like the boss is like commanding, you know, soldiers to throw their swords down or whatever, or I don't know. It just sort of helped to instill that kind of like epic battle blades thing. And so what I did was I just, within the fire section, which I'll talk about next, is just kind of and it's like, why are you fading in and not just putting the whole thing? Well, sometimes certain sections sound better in the context of all the mix. It's kind of hard to demonstrate like as I'm talking about it like this, but when everything's layered together, sometimes, yeah, you just want certain parts of it, and this sounds better than just having it straight. A lot of experimentation, a lot of listening to like the cadence of it as it's playing. But the main thing was that at the end of it, it gets louder and bigger to make that swelling moment even more epic. Okay, so we'll talk about the fire rain next, because this section was a bit strange, right? Because you have the thunder, right? And you're basically raining down these flaming arrows. So there's two things. It's like, what does fire rain sound like? And then two, what do those missile things sound like? And then that's not two, that's three. And then three, how do you even fit that all together and still have everything feel powerful? Which is kind of what I talked about before. And you can notice that the missiles themselves are smaller than they could have been. Like you could have flipped this entirely and gone a lot more powerful on the missiles and represented them in a different way and kept the ambience lighter, but you can't necessarily do both. So I made the decision to go with what I felt was more epic, especially in context of something like atonal and epic and like medieval, you know, and magical. So talk about the fire, which is basically just a more powerful version of the ring one. I have to make a Reaper action to scroll faster. It's a bit embarrassing. So just a little stronger than that. You know, if that, now that I kind of compare them, they're not that different. I think I might have made the ring stronger rather than this one weaker. Or maybe I had, oh no. Did I cut some low end out of stuff? Oh yeah, I think I'd cut some low end out of things and cleaned it up a little bit. Anyways, because the last thing that I did was fit in these missiles, which is probably partially why I ended up designing it the way I did instead of the missiles first. But the storm was visually impacting, and that was what I really wanted to focus on, which is probably why I started with that. Anyways, fire rain, not much to say. It's a bunch of fire processed kind of the same way I used the all pass on this. It just sort of like gives it that little sweetness, convolution reverb on it just to give it a bit more space, make it more epic. That EQ's not even doing anything while I sit there. And then that I didn't even use. So yeah, a few layers of that. There's just general noise. Like sometimes you're doing stuff and you're layering stuff in, and especially when you're in the zone with it and you've been working on it for like 6 hours and you add in those layers, it's like you have like microscopic hearing into it. And yeah, sometimes just layering a few extra things in, especially if you want it to have that power, yes, it makes it a bit less focused and clear, but sometimes, I don't know, it just gives you that emotional reaction and it sounds cool and you go with it. So that's why you'll get something random like this. Like very subtle. You're only going to hear that kind of in like the mid-range, which is also being tamed by basement over here with the clarity thing. It goes a little bit up. A A little bit goes a long way with this, like anything over like 20 and it starts to be pretty extreme. But anyways, nothing really that complicated. It's a fire, and then yeah, the battle thing that I showed, which isn't really fire, but it kind of happens at the same time. So then kind of the weirdest part of this, which I would say only works in context of everything else, is the fiery missiles. And so I'll let you hear what they sound like just on their own. Like that shouldn't work, but it does when you have everything in. And it works partially because everything else is so full frequency that any of the other frequencies that you would have in these missiles are sort of like made up in your mind out of these other things. Like, you know that there would be impacts, you know that there would be like embers flying and blade sounds and whatever, but your brain is like, oh, there's so much going on. Like, I wouldn't expect to hear that in real life. So I think it works in this context because I carved out space for it with basement and some EQ just throughout doing all of this. That I basically just, that was the place where I wanted to put them, is in that mid-range. So there's no point in them having like a ton of top end and a ton of whatever. Like, that sounds terrible on its own. Like, I know objectively that sounds bad, but in the context, it just, that's where they fit. Because yeah, your brain will fill in those gaps. We'll move on to the other part that I was a bit unsure about, which is this sort of like, not the contraction, but the sound of like sort of the burst before the charge downwards. Excuse me. So this was a bit difficult, right? Because I wanted it to be something different. Like, I had just given you a lot of, I feel like I've said the word tonal and atonal like 800 times throughout this, but there has been a lot of tonality and there was just a lot of noise. So I wanted to make something different that would really kind of capture the person's attention. And this is going in my reel, right? This is supposed to just be explicitly kind of like impressive. And I wanted to have a lot of wow factor and people to be like figuring out what's going on, but the next thing's already happening, for it to be an impressive thing. So that's why I used this really weird futuristic sound that I made for something else, which is actually, it was a grenade. It was originally a grenade sound that I made, which was pretty basic, like just some mechanisms or whatever blowing up. And then I processed that through a chain, which had like de-reverb, de-crackling, after a bunch of distortion with kilohertz shaper, in order to give this like really high energy, but also very like clean in the top end sort of sound. I don't even describe the rest of it because I didn't actually use the rest of it. What I used was the start of it here. Because it has this nice little charge up and it's so high energy with the pitch going up and everything. I did that in a synthesizer, Arturia pigments and everything. And originally I had it sounding a lot more futuristic. I had a bunch of other sounds here, which, is going into more of that like Diablo 4 magic territory where half the sounds sound similar vein like that with that low rumbling and stuff. But I couldn't get rid of this. I kept trying different stuff, but I just kept on liking this sort of a futuristic sound. And then the more I thought about it and everything, I was like, you know what? I really like the way this sounds. I tried different things, couldn't get it to work, so I'm using this. And I think it's like, I liked it too. Originally, it was like why I wanted it to be this like futuristic sound and to bring something tonal like that in is because the whole sky like contracts into this one point, right? So I was like, what does that sound like? Like how can I represent that? And to me, it's like something more, something like otherworldly almost, and in the context of something noisy and atonal and old and magic and whatever, it was something a bit futuristic where it was like unheard of or whatever, right? So the whole sky contracts into this one little point. I wanted it to sound cool. Anyways, so I tried to even make it even more futuristic, but pulled it back to that. And I know that's a lot to talk about for such a small sound, but a lot of stuff goes into my decision making sometimes. You know, I'm trying to do the best job that I can with these, and these videos too, is like explaining them. So, you know, it's nice to have like a well thought out reason for doing some of these design choices. And then the impact, nothing really crazy here. Just it's an impact sound. The punch itself is from a kick drum, and then there's like a lot of debris and whatnot. This is the impact. It's like just some techno drum. And then, yeah, originally I'd had even more of the low, mid, rumbly stuff. But I wanted to peel back on that a little bit and keep it as true to my original intention of very noisy, medieval, atonal magic type stuff. So yeah, I'll go through this quickly. Just a little noisy impact, a little bit of a whoosh in. Again, a lot of these things, like sometimes I'm adding that because I'm like, oh, I feel like I need a little bit more stereo. I feel like I need a little bit more top end. I feel like I need a little bit of this. So you find a source that does that, and regardless of what the source is, and like it kind of fits, it does this. I just need it for this moment. I'll fade it in here. I'll cut it up like this. A lot of these, it's like, why would you even think about adding this, you know, or that, or sometimes it's literally because my brain is just like, oh, I want more high end here. Or I want more 400 hertz, or I want more bass on the left side, or whatever, you know? It's easy to see all these tracks at this point and be like, why is there 10 tracks for this impact, you know? And it's because of that, because I lay something in and I'm like, okay, well, I see what I'm looking at and I know what I'm hearing, and I'm like, okay, I need more power in this range. I need more power in that range. I want more length in this range. I want more whatever, right? General impact. Like that one especially, I want more of that grit debris in the front. Like that's such a small sound, but with it it adds so much, and without it, so much is lost. I tell you, some of these things, it's the difference between this section and the other section where like I knew I was layering in a ton of stuff that would all add up into something awesome. But in this section, this was pretty specifically designed to fill in certain frequency ranges and time length. Same kind of deal as the last thing. And you have some longer, more realistic debris. Because you have stuff going on the screen. Like obviously I'm also matching what's going on the screen. It's not necessarily just about what would sound best. It's about, you can't have stuff on the screen without kind of showing it that much. Just kind of debris that adds up into something realistic. That's actually the same sound as the storm opening up, which I try to do sometimes, which I did here actually. Yeah, I used a bit of the knife section. I was like part of the build, and then part of the like futuristicness also is, this is something which, I mean, you could do a whole video on this, but when you want something, just sound design in general, you don't really want to like hear the plugin, you know? if you do, you have to be very intentional about when you do it, because like if I hear something and I'm like, I know that's the sound of a filter sweeping, and the reason you don't want that is because that's not a natural sound. That is not like, and if it is like, if you go into like a room or a cave or something, like that is a very specific audio phenomenon that you know to have a sound and then have it transform into something else. Like there's not many other than like big spaces and reverb and I guess like filtering from occlusion, which is why those are commonly available in games, like game engines. You don't want to hear the flanger necessarily or hear the EQ in such a deliberate way. But here it worked because I was trying to do something weird and otherworldly and futuristic, combined with the sound that I was ranting about before. Like you wouldn't want that for most sounds, or if it happened a lot or whatever. And again, maybe that's also something just like I've been doing sound design for a couple of years, but I've only been doing it's hard to say a couple of years because this is my experience. I won't go ranting about this right now, but like I've been an audio engineer for like 10 years, so my idea and my concepts of like audio processing and like hearing them and things is maybe a bit different. So maybe the last point that I made wasn't necessarily true for everybody, but I find it true for myself that I like to hide like the seams of a lot of what I do. And I don't want to, like, if it's like a laser gun, right? Like I don't want it to just be like, it's a flanger or like going whoop whoop or like a phaser or something. Like to me that sounds a bit lazy and like retro in a bad way necessarily, because those things weren't commonplace and we weren't used to hearing them. So doing something like that was weird and innovative. But now I feel like I personally like to hide the seams a lot of what I do. So with something like that, I will do it in certain spots. And of course, I'll always do it if it sounds good. But in general, those are my thoughts about, my quick thoughts about kind of like hiding your processing and not making it very obvious, and being very careful when you do something like a filter sweep or when you have like a very obvious plugin on something. And I find it's particularly common to hear that with filter sweeps, especially if you have like resonance or something. Yeah, I won't go ranting too much about it, but you hear a lot more in music than you do in sound design, right? It sounds really awesome in music, you know, those 303 bass lines and whatever, like that's awesome, you know, totally different conversation than game audio and my personal taste when it comes to sound effects and sound design. Anyways, just saying, I did it here because it worked, because it was a weird sound. It was futuristic. It was a weird sound. I won't necessarily say it was futuristic, but it was a different sound to accentuate the pivotal moment of the entire piece of it being otherworldly and more than it was, and different from everything that it was before it. You get me? Anyways. Yeah, overall, I am just so pleased with this project and the way that it all turned out and how powerful it feels. Not much of, I don't know, I've ranted enough that I don't really need to conclude all of this that much, but I'm very pleased with it. I'm hoping that my ranting in this breakdown was at least interesting to watch. Check out my stuff soon. Wow, my thumb is crooked. Check out my stuff soon when I have my full reel up, and pray for me that I can find a job in this job market. All right. Have a great day. And of course, if there's any questions or anything, ask me. Yeah, okay, cool. Peace.